Greetings, everyone, and I want to welcome you once again to our class. We are going to be talking about an important topic in biology, which is called the pteridophyta. Remember, in the first phase of our study of biology, we talked about the fact that plants are divided into two main groups. We have the lower plants, and then we have the higher plants. In the first phase of our study in biology, we talked about the three different groups of lower plants. We mentioned the schizophyta, the talophyta, and the bryophyta. So, in this second phase of the study of plants, that is botany, of course, you already know that, we are going to be looking at the study of the higher plants. The higher plants. And these higher plants include the pteridophyta and the spermatophyta. And of course, when I say spermatophyta, I'm talking about the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. These are the seed-bearing plants. That's the last group of plants we're going to be studying. And of course, that is the most advanced group of plants. So for the purpose of today's studies, we are going to be looking at a pteridophyta, like I said. This is the first group of the higher plants. And when we say lower and higher plants, of course, there are several factors that could be used to differentiate plants from the lower one to the higher one. And one of those factors is the presence or absence of the vascular bundle or the vascular tissue. So in the case of schizophyta, the talophyta, pteridophyta, we can comfortably say that they do not possess the vascular bundle or the vascular tissue. And of course, we are talking about the xylem and the phloem. But this other group of plants, the pteridophyta and the spermatophyta, of course, have the vascular tissue or the vascular bundle, the xylem and the phloem. And this can be a basis through which we can classify them into higher plants. So, pteridophyta, characteristics of pteridophyta. The first characteristic of pteridophyta is the fact that they are vascular plants, which I've just mentioned now. They are vascular plants in the sense that they have efficient tissues that help in the transport of food, and that's the phloem, and in the transport of water and nutrients, and that is the xylem. Then the second one is the fact that they possess true root, stem, and leaves. When we studied bryophyta, I remember vividly that I said they do not have true roots, a stem, and leaves, even though they have structures resembling them, but we can't uh, uh, comfortably or clearly say that a bryophyta has roots, stem, or leaves, even though they have structures resembling them. But in the case of pteridophyta, you can clearly say, okay, this pteridophyta has roots, even though not all. We are still going to come to that. We'll have the most primitive group of pteridophyta, which is called the Psilotum, that also does not have roots. So, but majorly they have true roots, they have stem and leaves. Then another characteristic is reproduction by spores. Yes, this is another vital characteristic of pteridophyta, even though it is not a diagnostic feature because some other plants apart from pteridophyta, like the bryophyta, also reproduce by the use of spores. But of course, we are including it because it's one of the features of pteridophyta. So they reproduce through the spores that are of course born in the sporangium. Then they also show what is called the alternation of generation. Alternation of generation is a very vital aspect of the reproduction in this organism, in the sense that the alternate between the diploid sporophytes to the haploid gametophytes. So they show alternation of generation. By the time we get to the life cycle, we will clearly see this. Then, of course, we'll have that water is essential for fertilization, or the fertilization depend on water. The presence of water, of course, helps in facilitating fertilization in this group of plants. When we get to plants like gymnosperm, that is when you now see that the agent of fertilization will now turn from water to wind. And of course, when we get to angiosperm, you now see that insects are now one of the agents of fertilization. So some of this group of plants have different agents of fertilization. Then they have multicellular sex organs. This is correct too. And you can also see this in Bryophyta. So the two sex organs that are present in Pteridophyta are the archegonium and the antheridium. The archegonium. So this is the male, this is the female sex organ. The antheridium is the male sex organ. A minute. This is the male sex organ, this is the female sex organ. So these two sex organs are found within these plants. Then they also have spores. They can be homosporous or heterosporous. That is, when they have the same kind of spore, they are said to be homosporous. And you see this in members of Psilotum, members of Lycopodium, members of Equisetium or Equisetinae. Then when you get to the Pteropsida, that is when you see that while some are still homosporous and some are now heterosporous, producing two different kinds of spores, the microspore and the megaspore. Then they thrive in damp and shady environment. So this is the kind of environment that you will likely see members of this group. So these are the basic characteristics of this group of plants that is called Pteridophyta. So having looked at this, the next thing we'll now talk about is the classification of Pteridophyta. The classification of Pteridophyta. So how is Pteridophyta classified? How is Pteridophyta classified? So this plant has about 4 different classes. We'll have the one that is called, the first one, Psilophytinae. The Psilophytinae, and under the Psilophytinae, you see the Mesipteris, then you see Psilotum. So these two are the major genera that are found in Psilophytinae. A minute. So if you don't call it Psilophytinae, another name that can be given to it is Psilotopsida. Psilotopsida. So Psilotopsida or Psilophytinae is the first class. Then the other is Psilophyteus. It has other called Psilophyteus. Then it has one called Psilophytaceae. So you can see all these things I've listed now. So let's go back to them again. The first one, like I said, is the class. The class is called Psilophytinae, Psilophytinae, or Psilotopsida. Sida, this is a class. Then the order is Psilophyteus. Please, I think I've said this in my previous classes, or let me just repeat them again. Note this. Under normal circumstances, or more often than not, when a biological name or a botanical name, let me say biological name, ends with C, E, A, E, it means it's referring to family. That's the name of a family. In majority of the cases, even though not in all cases, but in majority of the cases. Then when a name ends with ALES, it means it's talking about order. Then when it ends with IDA or AE, sometimes it may be referring to class. Okay, so going back to that again, this is a family. Then these two are the genera. Remember, the plural form of genus is genera. Genera. So these are the two genera that are found in this first class, Psilotopsida. So have several species of the Mesopteris and the Psilotum. Then the second class is called the Lycopsida, or the Lycopodinae. Let me be sure of the spelling. So that's correct. Lycopsida, Lycopodinae. Then it has the order Lycopodeus. Then it has the family Lycopodecia. Then genera, it has about 3 different genera. Remember, this is the order, this is the family. Then the genera, Lycopodium, that is one. Then Selaginellelis. Wait, just a minute. Let me first of all talk about the orders. The orders are 3, not actually 1. We have 3 orders. So let me first of all mention family. Let me not be confused. Some of these botanical names are confusing. So I have Lycopodeaceae. That's the family. So let me now mention the orders. Lycopodeus, then Selaginellelis, then Isoeteus. So this is where you now see Lycopodium as a general, Lycopodium. So it has 3 orders and 3 genera. Then this way you see Selaginella. Then this way you see Isoetes. So that is the second class of Pteridophyta. So let's go into the third class. So remember, This is a Lycopsida or Lycopodinae. They're the same thing. Then has a family, Lycopodacea. Then has three others, Lycopodeus, Selaginellelis. Then isoeteals. The isoetes is the example, which is the genus. Then Selaginella and Lycopodium. So the third class. So let's talk about the third class. The third class is number 3 is Equisetidae, or I call it the Sphenopsida. The Sphenopsida or Equisetidae. Then has order, just one order, Equisetials. Then it has family, Equisetaceae. Equisetaceae is a family. Then Equisetum is now the genus. And that reminds me, in the first class I mentioned, the Psilotopsida or Psilophytenae, the most common example is the Psilotum. The most common example there is the Psilotum. I think I remember I wrote Mesipteris first, but don't be confused. In case you are asked in the exam or wherever, just note that the most common example of the Psilotopsida is the Psilotum. And we're still going to be looking at the Psilotum. So, this is the Equisetum. Then the last one, which is the fourth one, the fourth class is Pteropsida. Pteropsida or Felicinae. Is that you call it the Pteropsida or the Felicinae? The Pteropsida or the Felicinae. So this Pteropsida or Felicinae, of course, is the most advanced group of Pteridophyta, the most advanced group. The Psilotopsida or Psilophytenae is the most primitive group. So this most advanced group has two different subclasses. These are subclasses. We'll have the first one, which is called the Eusporangiate, and we'll have the one they call the leptosporangiate, the leptosporangiate. So let's quickly look at the Eusporangiate and the leptosporangiate. Now, the Eusporangiate is more primitive, while the leptosporangiate is more advanced. So let's quickly look at them. So this first one that is called the Eusporangiate, Eusporangiate has three orders. We'll have the first one, the Ophioglosseus. Under this Ophioglosseus, which is the order, you now have so many genera, like you have the Ophioglossum. You have the Botrychum. You have Hemintostachys. There's H here. Hemintostachys. This is the first order. Then the second order will have the Osmondeus. Here we have example Osmonda. Then we'll have the Maraschius. You have the Marasha. So this is the first order, this is the second order, and this is the third order. So these are the three orders that are found under the Eusporangiate. And like I said, the leptosporangiate is more advanced than the eusporangiate, which is more primitive. So let's now look at the others that are found under the leptosporangiate. Leptosporangiate. So under leptosporangiate, we now have uh, the filicles. I have to be sure of the spellings. Yeah, that's correct. The filicles, where we have the teres, and even the diopteris. They have the Salvinia, and Azula, Salvinia and Azula, then Marsilia. So these are the examples of the leptosporangiate. Leptosporangiate. The leptosporangiate. The leptosporangiate. All right, so this is how far we can go, um, you know, in this aspect of classification. So we're going to be looking at another aspect of this pteridophyta. This okay. Still have a little time. I wouldn't want the video to be too long. So let's look at origin. Quickly look at origin of pteridophyta. The origin of pteridophyta. And after that, we will talk about the little difference between the eusporangiate. Okay, fine, let's look at that. The eusporangiate and the leptosporangiate, there is a little difference when it comes to how their sporangium is produced. The sporangium usually is housed or is found within the sporophyll. The sporophyll is the reproductive leaf. So in the case of the eusporangiate, there is there are a group of cells, which is called a row or superficial cells from the sporophyll. From the sporophyll, remember, we want to look at the difference between these two subclasses of Pteropsida or the Felicinae, the eusporangiate and the leptosporangiate. So, in the case of the eusporangiate, and like I said, we'll have what is called the sporophyll. The sporophyll. The sporophyll. The sporophyll is the reproductive leaf. The reproductive, by the time we get to the life cycle, you see reproductive branch carrying the reproductive leaf, which is called the sporophyll. Then inside the sporophyll, you now see the sporangium. So we'll have group of cells of the sporophyll that divide into, we call them a row of superficial cells. Row or superficial cells. So in the case of eusporangiate, this row or superficial cells now divide into two to form the outer cells and the inner cells. So these outer cells will now develop further to form the wall of the sporangium, whereas these inner cells will form the sporogenous tissue and the sporogenous cells or the sporogenous tissue, and these are the tissues that help in nurturing the growing spores. Helps in nurturing the growing spores. So, like I said, these outer cells will now form the wall of the sporangium. Then the inner cells will now form the sporogenous tissue. And of course, like I said, the function is to help give nourishment to the growing spores. So this is how the sporangium is formed in the case of the eusporangiate. Then in the case of the leptosporangiate, the entire sporangium develops from a single superficial cells of the sporophyll. They do not have group of cells or row of superficial cells as you see in the case of sporangium. Just one cell from the sporophyll is what forms the entire sporangium. Okay, so having noted this now, the next thing to do is to talk about the origin of Pteridophyta. The origin of Pteridophyta. And we're not going to waste so much time here because there's actually nothing to waste time, on here. The origin of Pteridophyta is not purely certain, and what scientists, sorry, what scientists have said in the past uh, are merely a kind of speculation, even though there is one or two proofs. But then there is no collectively generally accepted view when it comes to the origin of Pteridophyta. So, some scientists believe that Pteridophyta originated and thrived within the Paleozoic era, so many million years ago. When it comes to biology, you see that you begin to hear different era, Mesozoic era, the Paleozoic era, the Devonian era. So this era just signify millions of years ago when the organism or the plant once existed, or evolved. Sorry, not when because they're still existing when they evolved. So the most primitive group of Pteridophyta that was found within this Paleozoic era is the one we call the Psilophytes. Psilophytes. Don't forget that Psilophytes is the order that is found within the Psilotopsida, which is the first class of Pteridophyta. And that is why I probably said, or I said initially, that the most primitive group of Pteridophyta is the Psilotum, or the Psilophytes, or the Psilotopsida, whichever way. You're just talking about class, order, and example, or species, sorry. So we have two different views when it comes to the origin of Pteridophyta. Why some scientists believe that Pteridophyta originated from the Bryophyta, and of course it's logical to say that Pteridophyta originated from Bryophyta because we have the Schizophyta, we have the Talophyta, you now have the Bryophyta in that succession before you now see the Pteridophyta and then Spermatophyta. But then some other scientists, still believe that Pteridophyta originated from the same alga stock where Bryophyta originated from. Remember, we talked about the algae stock, stock that is called Eulotrichus. So there is an order of algae that is called the Eulotrichus. Of course, we'll have so many of them. When we studied algae, we'll mention them: the Chlorococcus, the Volvococcus, the Caulapils, the Eulotrichus, and so on and so forth. So one of them is Eulotrichus. So some scientists are still of the view that Pteridophyta originated from this algae stock that is called the Eulotrichus, while some believe that they originated from Bryophyta. So that is it about the origin of Pteridophyta. The next important thing now we'll talk about is Stele, and that is probably where we may end the lecture for today, depending on the time. This is 29 minutes, so I wouldn't want us to stretch more than expected. Just a minute. So in Pteridophyta, the vascular tissues with other associated tissues that form the central column of the stem, the root, and the leaf is what we call the stele. So the stele possibly refers to all the tissues from the pith down to the pericycle. I know you may not understand what I'm saying. Let me break it down. Let me use a structure. So in the roots or the stem or the leaf of a plant, we'll have the central column, which is called the pith. The pith. This central column that is formed outside this central column that is called the pith, will have other associated tissues. Other associated tissues like the phloem, then the xylem. And when I say the xylem, we have other types of xylem like the metaxylem, the protoxylem. So these tissues end at a region that is called the pericycle. The pericycle. The pericycle. And this pericycle is now being covered or surrounded by another tissue that is called the endodermis. The endodermis. So that's why the first thing I said was that stele refers to the vascular tissue in uh, association with other tissues that form the central column of the stem, the root, and the leaf. So within this uh, uh, stem, root, or leaf, we'll have the pith, and we'll have other associated tissues. So the distance between the pith and the pericycle is what is called the stele. Not just the distance, sorry. Let me know you so that I won't confuse you. The pith, the central column, which is the pith, from the central column, which is the pith, to other tissues, other associated tissues, and I've mentioned them majorly the vascular tissues, the phloem and the xylem, down to the pericycle is what is called a stele. So that is why in this definition it says the vascular tissue together with the associated tissues that make up the central column of the root and stem and leaf are components of the cell. So it says stele therefore constitute all the tissues from the center to the pericycle. So all the tissues, so stele consists of all the tissues from the center. This center is the central column of the pith, from the center down to the pericycle, are now being surrounded by the endodermis. Of course, if we extend this, we now see, of course, the cortex, then the hypodermis, then the epidermis. But we are still going to come to that probably in the later part of this study. So this is what pith is. And scientists have studied this pith, stele. Scientists have studied this stele and they discovered that there are three categories of stele. There are three categories of stele. We'll have the first one, which is called the first type of stele, which is called the protostele. The protostele. The protostele. They'll have the second type of stele, which is called the siphonostele. Siphonostele. We'll have the third one, which is called the dictyostele. The dictyostele. Dictyostele. So let's look at them one after the other. The basic characteristics of this, as a matter of fact, proto means first. So the first group of stele to have evolved is known as the protostele. And this kind of stele is devoid of pith. So there is absence of pith in this kind of stele. So if you look at the examples of plants that have this protostele, you see that they're devoid of pith, like you see in the rhizome of Psilotum and also in Lycopodium clavatum. These organisms have, sorry, this species of Pteridophyta have the protostele, and you can't see pith in them. There is absence of pith. So they are pithless stele, or pithless species of plants, or pithless stem, pithless roots, and pithless leaf. So that is the protostele. This protostele is further divided into various groups, and like I said, the basic characteristics of the stele, of the protostele, is that there is absence of pith. And because there is absence of pith, it is now the xylem that forms the central column. The xylem that forms the central column, then being surrounded by the phloem. So in this stele, in this protostele, you continue to hear xylem, phloem, xylem, phloem. Remember, in the general description of stele I mentioned, there are basically three things I also mentioned, even though they are more than, but basically, I mentioned pith, I mentioned the xylem and the phloem, which is the vascular tissue, then I now mentioned pericycle, and of course, the endodermis is surrounding it. So, while talking about protostele, or while talking about stele, you continue to hear xylem, phloem. So in the case of protostele now, since we do not have pith, since we do not have pith, then the xylem will now form the central column. Normally it is the pith that forms the central column. But since there is no pith, then the xylem forms the central column with a ring of a phloem surrounding it. So that is basically what happens. Just a minute. So with a ring of phloem surrounding it. All right. So having known that, we'll now go into the types of protostele. We'll have the haplostele. We'll have the actinostele. We'll have the actinocele. We'll have the plectostele. We'll have the plectostele. Then we'll have the mesostele. The mesostele. The mesostele. So let's go into the first one. The first one is haplostele. So haplostele still goes with the definition of the protostele because of course it's still part of. So in haplostele, the xylem forms the central column, then being surrounded. The xylem forms the central column. This is the central column, then being surrounded by the phloem. So this P is phloem, then S is the xylem. Then in the case of actinostele, the xylem, appears like a star. Appears like a star, then being surrounded by the phloem, being surrounded by the phloem. So this is the xylem forming the central column. In the case of actinostele, then being surrounded by the phloem. So this is X xylem, then P phloem. So this is A, B, C, D. So this is A, this is B. Then for C, in this case, you discover that both the xylem and the phloem form what is called parallel bands. They form parallel bands alternating with each other. So if this is xylem, this is phloem, then this is xylem, then this is phloem. So the shaded one could be used as xylem, while the plain one is used as phloem. So they form parallel bands that alternate with each other. Then the last one is the mesostele. So in the case of mesostele now, you discover that the xylem forms various irregular groups. that are embedded in a mass of phloem. So it means still the what the xylem forms various irregular groups. These are the various irregular groups. These various irregular groups, and these various irregular groups are now embedded in a mass of phloem. In a mass of phloem. So this is what happens in the case of the mid-stele. Then what's the time? 40. Then we now have the next one, which is called I hope you understood everything I said in this step, because this protostele is usually the most difficult one. So let me see if I can repeat a little. So I said we have three types of stele: the protostele, the sphenopsida, and the diastele. So the first one is called a protostele, and they are the most, I said they're the most primitive group of steles. And that since there's absence of pith, the xylem is an example question. The xylem now assumes the position of the pith. So instead of the pith forming the central column, it is now the xylem that forms the central column with the phloem alternating around it. So it is usually the phloem that covers, that surrounds the xylem in this case. Remember this, the phloem always surrounds the xylem. It's the xylem that forms the central column. So that is actually what happens in haplostele. The xylem is there occupying the space of the pith with the phloem, surrounding it. Then in the case of actinostar, so the xylem now forms a star, and it also has the phloem surrounding it. Then in the case of prectosale, both the xylem and the phloem form irregular groups, and these irregular groups alternate with each other. Sorry, they form parallel bands. Sorry, the plectocele form parallel bands. Para. So they form parallel bands. Yes, they form parallel bands that alternate with each other. Then, of course, we have the midsteel that form where the xylem forms various irregular groups that are now embedded in a mass of phloem. Okay, I think this will suffice. Let's now go into the second group. The second group, which is called the Sphenopsida. So this Sphenopsida is the second group of stele. And one basic characteristic of Sphenopsida is that there is now the appearance of pith. So the pith comes and pushes away the xylem, which is occupying its position. Just like you left and somebody, was now illegally occupying your position. So when you now came in, what you now did was to push the person away. So that is what happened, or what happens in the case of Sphenopsida. So once the pith appears, or as the pith appeared, then it pushed away the xylem that was illegally occupying its position, because the pith is supposed to be occupy the central column, the position, that position, the central column is supposed to be occupied by the pith. But it does not happen like that in the protocell. That is what we've been trying to establish. So these this Sphenopsida has two different types. Has two different types. We have the so I have to be sure of the spelling. The amphiploic and ectoploic. That's correct. Amphiploic and the ectoploic Sphenopsida. So let's look at what happens in the case of amphiploic and what happens in the case of epiploic. So this is the pit. This is the pit forming the central column. I hope you are seeing what I'm doing. This pit is now being surrounded. Okay. Okay, look at what let me say before I now draw it. In the case of amphiploic Stele, in the case of Stele, a pit appears. Then the xylem, of course, is pushed out. That means the xylem is now covering or surrounding the pit, whereas the phloem, as usual, is also surrounding the xylem. But in the case of amphiploic Stele, what usually happens is that uh, the pit, of course, pushes away the xylem. Then the phloem now covers the xylem or surrounds the xylem on the inside and on the outside. That is for amphiploic. For ectoploic, the pit, as usual, pushes away the xylem, but the phloem surrounds the xylem only on the outside. That is just a difference. So let me use drawing to explain that. So let's take this as the pit, as a pit. This is the pit. Then this pit now has uh, the shaded part. Let's call the shaded part the xylem. Let's call the shaded part the xylem. So you can see what happened now. So this is the pit. This is the pit. Then this pit is being surrounded by 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 the xylem, which is the shaded part. The xylem, which is shaded part. But then the phloem is surrounding the xylem on the inside and on the outside. Invariably, it means that the vascular tissue that has direct impact or that is directly surrounding the pit, in this case, is no longer the xylem but the phloem, because the phloem is surrounding the xylem on the inside. So look at it now. This plain one is the phloem on the inside, and on the outside. So you can see this white part is used to denote the phloem surrounding the xylem on the outside and surrounding it too on the inside. But in the case of ectoploic, the case of ectoploic, the phloem is only surrounding the xylem on the outside. So let me draw this properly. So this is a vascular tissue. Then you see this is the xylem surrounding the pit. You now see the phloem. You now see the phloem surrounding the xylem. So we'll take this as the xylem S. So this is a phloem surrounding the xylem only on the outside, not on the inside. So that means that the vascular tissue that directly surrounds the pit, in the case of ectoploic, is the xylem, no longer the phloem. I don't know if this makes sense. So the last one is the Stele, which is the third group of. Remember, this is amphi, this is ecto. So the last group of stele is the Stele. So this is the most advanced group of stele, and this one, evolved from the Sphenopsida. The Stele evolved from the Sphenopsida, and in this case, the stele is now broken down into uh, vascular strands, into what is called a vascular strands. And these vascular strands, they still now, they still with all these associated tissues and what have you, associated tissues are now broken down into strands, into vascular strands, into vascular strands, into vascular strands. Into vascular strands. Now it has now created a gap, and this gap is called the leaf gap. The leaf gap. Then the mechanism through which this gap or the tool that created this leaf gap within this type of stele or within this type of stele is now what they call the leaf trace. The leaf trace. The leaf trace. So, like I said, this is the most advanced group of stele, and in this case, the stele is broken into various strands, into these various vascular strands by the leaf trace, and it creates a gap that is called the leaf gap. Was the time? So, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is where we are going to stop for today. I hope I'm not missing anything. So, in our next class, just note the following. We're going to look at the following. We are still talking about pteridophyta. We are not done with pteridophyta. So you can see we have a lot to do. Sorry that I've not been uploading videos. I've been busy with so many other things. So, but I think I'm a bit free now. We continue to upload at least once a week. Make sure if you have not subscribed, kindly subscribe and share to people in other schools. You know, we need this class in botany. You hardly see a class that is so simplified like what we are doing here. So please kindly share to people all over the universities that you know, not just in this country, Ghana, Zimbabwe, Equatorial Guinea, the United States, and UK. Anywhere you know students that will be interested in classes like this, please kindly share to them. And probably any other platform you know we help to, you know, get access to as many as possible. You are free to do that. So in our next class, we are going to be looking at these various groups, various classes or groups of pteridophyta. So for the first group, we have Psilotum. We have Psilotum. Psilotum is the representative of Psilotopsida. So we'll be looking at Psilotum. We'll look at some few features of Psilotum. Then we'll look at the life cycle. Then the second one is a Lycopodium. Lycopodium. Also look at Lycopodium. Then what again? We look at Equisetum. Equisetum. Then we'll now look at the Dryopteris. The Dryopteris. The one you could call the fen. The one you call the fen. That is what we'll be looking at. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being part of this class. So, see you in my next class.